I am going to show you exactly how I've generated over 30 million views this year with my clients with only 3 hours a month together using what I call smart sessions. You ready? Let's jump in. All right, my beautiful, passionate human beings, welcome back to class. In this episode, we are going to be talking about smart sessions. So what are you going to learn from this episode? 3 things. Number 1, what smart sessions are. Number 2, how to set them up. And number 3, the magic acronym of the strategy that really makes you set yourself apart. All right, you ready for this? Let's just jump straight into it. All right, so what is a smart session? So a smart session is my term that I have generated and created inside of my firm for a process of content creation that is very similar in some ways to what some people would call a mockcast. Now, a mockcast is going to be different in a lot of different ways than what we do, but I just want to make sure that you don't get this idea in your head of like, oh, I've heard of this before. It's called a mockcast. Yeah, everybody does them, blah, blah, blah. I cannot tell you how many different people I've talked to, agency owners, content creators, who say that they do mockcasts, that it's a normal and regular part of their content strategy, yet they don't get the results that we've gotten. So clearly we're doing something different. And so I had to delineate from using the term mockcast when I said to something different so that people would understand that it's not quite the same exact process, okay? But what a smart session is in a nutshell, it is a session for content that is designed to feel like a long form piece when it is in fact really designed to do short form content in 60 to 90 second intervals that follow the viral framework for content. Okay, so we're going to break down what that means. It might have been a lot for you, but don't worry, I'm going to break down all of it. But the best way that I can explain it is that it's like a combination of doing podcasting and also doing scripting and like scripted content. So I see that there's 2 camps for this as I've been studying content and learning about different strategies and how different agencies and firms offer services and different creators choose to make content. I've noticed that you kind of fall into those 2 camps. You know, there could be like a hybrid in between there that's maybe different than what I'm thinking of. But for the most part, you generally find people in the camp of like, look, for my content, I typically just do my podcast and I post those podcast clips. I do that long form and that's my main thing. Or you have the other people that are like, yeah, I do content, but I typically am like, strategizing out what I'm doing. I'm scripting out my pieces and then I'm recording all of them in one go. And when I'm talking about like scripting content, I'm not talking about like your average run of the mill, like hairdresser down the street who's doing content. I'm talking about like founders and individuals who educate their audience and that do talking head type content for their strategy and for whatever their services or their offer is. And so when you have these 2 camps, you have some pros and you have some cons. Okay, so with podcasting, one of the pros is that sometimes it's easier for setup. It's a one-time thing. Like for instance, this is my podcast setup. And if I wanted to, I could just interview people and I could just, have a co-host and just hit the record button and just make content. And it could be pretty easy, right? And that's great. And that's a great pro for it. And, it can accelerate trust when people want to learn more about you and learn about what your personality is like and your insights and everything else that goes into that, right? Podcasts can be great for those things. The downside of podcasts is that when you try to take podcasts and you try to clip them up into short form pieces of content, you actually start to find that there are more challenges because you're not really getting the results you want and you might not be sure why. I just recorded an episode that was on why podcast clipping sucks and what you should be doing instead. So if you haven't listened to that, go and listen to that one because that one's going to be more of a in-depth breakdown of understanding why podcast clips don't work as well because I'm not going to be talking about that in this. But the proposed solution that I give into that is very similar to this breakdown of this episode, which is to do smart sessions. So the cons is that with a podcast, it's hard to control the viral framework within it. And so when you go to cut up clips, it just doesn't resound with people. It doesn't connect and it doesn't perform at the levels that you want it to. And so long form is great for podcasts and just making it on Spotify, maybe even do video on YouTube and that kind of stuff. But the second you get into the short form space, you find a lot of challenges with it. Now, if we want to go to the other side, which is the scripting side, scripting can be great because that's more controlled, right? You can choose your script, you can choose what you're going to talk about, and that can be awesome. Now, that kind of gets into the camp of how much time are you investing into the prep of each episode, or sorry, not even just the episode, but to each piece of content. And also with the script, how good are you at scripting? And so it's going to take time, but if you wanted to do scripting, the pros are that you can completely control the hook. You can completely control the narrative of what you're talking about. And if you want to go really high level into it, you can use your transcript to create notes and highlights and breakdowns of what you want your editors to do in that video so that you almost manifest exactly what the vision is straight to life. Now, if you don't have that level of, vision and being able to kind of see abstractly in your head what you want content to look like, then you probably don't even get to do that. You just send it off to your editors, or maybe even you edit yourself, and you just kind of make the basic cuts. And that's all you get. But the benefit is that with scripting, you still are in control of what you want to talk about. And as you do it with repetition, you can get really good to where it flows. And when you can do content, you can script pretty fast and you can get a lot of things done. The only challenge with that, though, and on the con side, is that it takes a lot of time until you get to a place where you really know how to script content and you have your frameworks for how you do it. You kind of know the language and what you want to say. I've seen some really great creators taking about an hour per video for their scripting, and that usually comes with also doing a lot of research because they do more journalistic and news reporting. But if you're going to do educational base, you could kind of script it out prior and do it in maybe 20 to 30 minutes at most after doing some revisions. Usually the first draft of whatever you do, you still want to do revisions for. It's always going to be your worst. But it's still going to take some time, and you might get faster at it. That might be great, but again, it takes time. And on top of that, with scripting, is it lacks the elements that a podcast can have, where it feels like a genuine conversation you're having with someone versus talking directly to the camera. Now, if you were to do scripting and you learned how to follow those cadences and the rhythm and even the fluctuation in your voice to make it feel like you're just talking to them, then you can conquer a lot of those things. But again, it takes a lot of time. Time is that big component, right? So like you have podcasts where, it's easy. So you have like a removal of a lot of friction in the process of content creation. But then your cost of that is that your content is not going to perform well in short form. Now, the benefit of the scripting is that you can do it. It's just going to take a lot of time, but it might have a much better payoff. And so you kind of have these two camps where you get the benefit with the smart session of combining the podcast elements of making it feel like it's a natural conversation. It feels like you're in the room with them. It doesn't feel like it's scripted. It feels like it's more from the heart. And then you also have some of the scripting side where you still prep your hooks. You still kind of think about how can you frame this into like a 60-second interval. And then by learning the frameworks and understanding the principles of how to create content like this, you almost can just basically make the script in your head to where you just go to report or just to make content. And it's almost like, it sounds like you scripted it, but it's not scripted. People sometimes are blown away that the content that I'm creating is never really scripted. I'm just talking off of the cuff. It's also because I've been doing this for like 10 years and doing content. And I was definitely not anywhere close to the experience that I have now when I was first starting off. And you just have to have a level of humility to be like, all right, this is going to take time. I'm going to learn this and I'm going to get better over time. But you have to be patient. And if you're not patient with that, you're going to have a challenge. So that's where Smart Sessions comes in as being kind of like the golden apple, or like the perfect like in between that you can get the compromise of both sides of it and reap the benefits of both if you can do it properly. Okay, so that's kind of an idea of what a smart session is on like a abstract. What's the difference between making it a podcast or doing scripted content? But let me break down what the setting looks like of what a piece of content like this or a session like this would be. So in general, when we do it with our clients, I'll bring all of our gear with us. So we don't really do any virtual sessions with our clients. We can set it up exactly the way I have it like this and do it like so. But for the most part, I'll bring my stuff. So I got a key light studio light right here. I have a hair light that's sitting over here that accentuates the back of my neck so that it gives some dimension and separation from the wall. We typically like to pick a background where you have some decent, decor or some dimension so that it doesn't feel flat. Unless you do a black wall. I've done a black wall before and that already kind of sticks out. But if you do anything that's just like a basic white wall or gray wall, it's kind of boring. You want something that helps kind of like stick out, right? We want to figure out visually how to make this more appealing. But then what you do is you position yourself as if you're going to record a podcast session. And so you have your creator, which is the individual or the founder specifically of who we work with. And sorry if I stutter. Sometimes I talk so fast that my mind is ahead of where my brain can catch up. And I'm working on it, okay? I'm working on it. Like I said, we're not all perfect here. So anyways, we set up a space where you have your creator who's set up with the cameras, focused on them. We typically like to film with our cameras in a vertical format. So this is technically horizontal, and that's the standard. But when you're doing vertical content for short form specifically, and you can get the framing right, you get such a much better quality in the video because you're filming it vertically and you don't have to crop in as far because it's already basically in the same like frame and actual like pixels as far as the design is, versus having to do it in this where I have to scale myself in. Now you can still do it this way if it's easier for you to just set it up that way. It's fine. And if the subject's going to be moving a lot, you don't want them out of frame, then film it that way. But you set it up as if it's like an interview style. Get the cameras on them, get the lights, make sure everything looks great, makes it feel like you're in a high production space for a podcast. And then what we do is we basically just go back and forth on content for like 3 hours straight. And there's a few different ways that we can prep our content when we do this. And we'll talk about that when we get to the acronym. But in general, we're just going to do content that they've prepped, that we've prepped, and then we come in and we just crank on it for about 3 hours at a time. Now, I prefer to make this content look as high as quality as possible. I just love when like content looks super high quality. And if you're a founder that's listening to this or watching this, you probably resonate with that, right? Because even though in the market space of content creation, typically you don't need to have production grade level like content in order for it to perform. In fact, sometimes it can actually hurt your conversions if things feel too production-y. But in general, you want to look good and feel good and speak to the professionality and the true quality of like your knowledge and insight. And when you have a basic setup and a basic iPhone and, you know, not really great audio quality, it kind of feels like you're a rookie. Even if you're super knowledgeable on what you talk about, you're still going to come off as someone who doesn't really seem like they know what they're doing. And it sucks because that's not true. There's no direct correlation that shows that your knowledge of whatever your industry is that you have tons of experience with and maybe even decades of experience with, compared to having to get onto social media and like learn how to do content and to do all these things. And that's just where for us, I have the advantage of being in the space for so long and learning and doing these things that I create cool setups like this because I love how it looks. But in general, we're going to make sure that our video quality is great. I always shoot in 4K. If we want to get super nerdy for a quick second, and maybe if you're not nerdy on this, you can skip over this or take a note to look at this later. In most cameras, you have different formats for how you can record your content. And typically you have in the Canon world, which I'm a Canon guy, I use Canon content. You have two formats. You have what's called All-I, and then you have what's called IPB. And what All-I means is that if you're filming in, let's say 60 frames per second, which don't do that for this content, always film in either 24 or 30. I recommend 30. It's going to record every single frame of that video. So a video is just a bunch of pictures, right? And so if you have 30 frames per second, that means that there's literally 30 pictures every second that's being captured. And that's why the less frames you go to 24, that's what like movies use, and it makes it all cinematic with some motion blur. But if we're filming in 30, it's pretty basic for content creation. And All-I is going to record every single one of those frames into it. And so the size of those files, it becomes astronomical. The other alternative is you have what's called IPB. And what IPB is it basically takes like the first frame and it takes the fourth frame and it basically predicts what those other three frames would look like. And it uses AI technology to basically create those imagined frames to fill in that gap so that it doesn't have to fill it with actual frames. It can be a compressed version of it. And by doing that, it can reduce the size of your videos dramatically. And the reason why I even bring this up is because when you're dealing with long form content like this, where you're recording for multiple hours at a time and you have to deliver this content to your editing team, if your files are like 8 to 12 gigabytes long, or honestly, when we're doing this kind of stuff and you get into doing 3 hours and you're doing it in All-I, it might be upwards of 200 gigabytes, which is an astronomical amount of footage. And if you're just trying to hire someone overseas to do this and they don't have the internet speeds, or it times out because of how big the files are, you're going to be hosed. You're going to be like, I have no idea how to do this. I don't know how to record this. And then you're going to have to record at a lower quality. And even at lower qualities at 1080 and All-I, it could still do the same thing. The point is that regardless of whatever camera you use, there's typically a compressed format that you can record in that allows you to save space, but it doesn't reduce quality at a level that most would even notice. You would have no idea that I'm recording an IPB Lite, which is an even more advanced version of that allows the files that I'm recording to be compressed at an even higher level. And you're not going to notice the difference. It's still in 4K, still looks great, but it saves you tons of space. So that's your little quick masterclass on just video content, but make sure if you can record in 4K and record in a format that's going to save you on the back end with uploading these massive files. The next thing you want to do is have really high quality audio. Okay, so right here, what I'm operating with is what's called an SM7B. It's by a company called Shure, Shure. They are known for having, honestly, one of the most popular microphones that's on the market. You see Joe Rogan using this. You see Logan Paul and the Impulsive podcast using this. You see Lex Friedman. You see all these big shots are using the SM7B, and it's for a reason. They're incredibly high quality. And these cost about $400 a piece. And with whatever setup you're doing, I'm usually going into an audio recorder. So I usually go direct to it. Now, sometimes you can use what's called a cloud converter, or a cloud lifter, excuse me. Cloud converter is a different thing, where it's going to basically raise some of the levels that internally in the Shure SM7B that are usually lower. And so it basically gives a big boost for your recording so that it can pick up more powerful pronunciations and just give more presence to your audio. That requires you using a setting called phantom power in order to boost it. It's usually at 48 volts. And that's basically the internal setting you have to use on whatever your recorder is in order for the audio to even pick up. And again, if you're bored at this or this is over your head, then just skip past this part, okay? Just kind of scroll through. Maybe I'll put a timestamp in here or something for you to see. But in general, I want to just give it straight to you guys about what to look for, because I see that it can be challenging to see people saying, get this, and then you run into all these troubleshooting issues when you try to set things up and you have no idea what you're doing. And I'm also going to do a full breakdown of podcast setup and studio setup for you, so you have that also. But for now, I'm just kind of giving you the quick versions. So going back to this, the SM7B is a great microphone. There's a couple other ones out there that I would maybe recommend. The Rode Pod Mic is an incredible microphone, and that's a fraction of the cost. It's about $100 for the standard US XLR microphone, but you can get the Pod Mic 2, which is the black version, and that is a USB microphone and XLR, which means that you can run the XLR version of it into an audio recorder to record content wherever you want to go. Or you can do USB where it plugs directly into your computer like I am, and I'm recording this on Adobe Audition for the audio. So you just have the source directly into your computer. This is for streamlining your process. This is for being able to systemize it in a way where you can just sit down, hit record, and keep going. And you can also do this for smart sessions too. You know, it's the same process. I could literally be doing a FaceTime with someone on my teleprompter right here with my guy Reese, who does all my content with me and my clients. And we can record content and I'm just talking to the camera too. So it works either way, but the idea is you just want to make sure that you're picking a very high quality audio mic, because audio makes up 50% of your video. If you have horrible audio, it doesn't matter how good your video looks. You have to have quality audio. In fact, if you had to choose between buying on a limited budget, really high quality audio and really high quality video, 1,000,000% by the audio, because you can still use your iPhone. You could still use 4K on there. You could still use lighting techniques and things to make your iPhone quality look good, but you can't replace the audio if you don't have good audio. It's just, there's no real way around it. So make sure to get a mic, have that set up kind of in a podcast type format. And if you don't want it to look podcasty where you have a microphone stand and it's like right into their face, then use what's called the DJI Mic 2s as your alternative. I don't think I have mine with me. I didn't plan for me to talk deep about this, but it's basically these little microphones that you just can clip them onto you, or use an auxiliary lavalier mic so that it just plugs into it and then it just clips onto the side. And then that can just record pretty high quality content, and that goes directly into the camera. Again, I'm going to break this more down in detail in another video, but in general, get that high quality audio, get that high quality video, and make sure that this is set up to look stellar, because we want this quality to be as best as possible. So then when we edit this content and it goes out and it's distributed, it looks professional, it looks clean, and it's able to connect with people on a different level. And this is exactly the strategy of what we use with our clients. Okay. All right. So now that we've got the visual setup of kind of how to make this look, my other note that I would actually make before I move on, because I do not want to forget this because it's very important, wherever you set up, just make sure that there's separation between you and whatever the background and the wall is. Most creators make the mistake of trying to set up literally right up against the wall. And what it does is that you start to see shadows from the lights on your backdrop. So if I were let's say 4 feet closer to the wall and I had this light on me, you would see that shadow on the wall, and now it looks super tacky. And unless you painted a different color, you're still going to see that. And it also creates no separation from you in the background. And so there's no depth. You don't get that blurry background feel that you can get if you have more separation. The farther away you separate yourself from your background, you just play with your camera and do it. You'll notice dramatically the difference in the depth as long as you keep your aperture low. And your aperture is just going to be the how wide open the lens is and how much light it lets in. It's that thing on your camera that either is in a 2.8, a 4.0, a 5.6, that kind of thing. So make sure that you're separating yourself from the background so that the content looks super high quality. Okay, so that's that. Now, when you get into it, you're just going to record in 60 to 90 second intervals, and you're just going to bust through content. You're going to have your idea, you're going to spit out the hook, and then you're going to go for 60, 90 seconds. You want to make sure that you do this with another person because that's going to create the most genuine experience. But I would be strategic with who you find. Find someone who maybe has some social media experience. Find someone who is a little bit more intentional with these types of sessions and wanting to help you and maybe wanting to learn more about this, because they can just go watch all my content, study and learn this stuff, and then be that support for you. But don't do this alone. So with that being said, what I would say is let's break down the SMART acronym. So SMART Sessions is an acronym of SMART, and it breaks down into the different stages of what these sessions look like. So it gives you much more depth into knowing how these are different from traditional mockcasts. So number one, S stands for strategize. Okay. And by the way, T, the last one on this list, is actually the most important. So make sure to stick to the end, because that's the one that's going to make the biggest difference in whether or not your content actually performs. All right. So number one, strategize. This is where you're going to go and do your research. This is where you're going to prep your ideas. There is a lot of different ways to do this. The best ideas that I would recommend when it comes to strategizing ideas is, number one, you have to know your audience. Know who you're trying to reach. If you have no idea who you're trying to make content for, it's going to be really hard to connect with them and to create content that resonates and that people even care about. Do not try to be the guy that goes for everybody and tries to be everything to everybody, because that's just, no one's going to resonate with that. It's going to feel too broad. It's going to feel like there's too much competition. It's too saturated in that market. You want to be more hyper niche down if you can with some of these content ideas, because it's going to speak directly to the people you're trying to reach. So make sure that you know who your audience is. And then with that, know their pain points. Know their challenges, know their struggles. What are their dreams? Where are they now in their life and where do they want to be? And then from there, you can decide what you want your content to be about by just simply answering those questions in the most valuable way possible that you believe you can do that. Now, in another episode, we're going to talk about how to teach those ideas and how to execute on those so that you communicate in the best way possible. But for now, we're just going to go over the general concept of just strategizing ideas. The next that I would say on the list is going online and looking at what's trending. Go to your platforms like X, or go to Instagram, or even go to TikTok or YouTube, or even go to newsletters and just look at what are the things that are trending around your category, your market, your industry, your space, and keep note of that. And then also at the same time, what I would do is look at other content creators who are already in your space that are doing content like you, and not only look at what's best performing for them, like go and look at the outliers in their social content and figure out like, hey, this one performed better than these other videos by like 10 times. What did he talk about in this one? What did she say in this one? And use that as a good like North Star. But then also go look at comments, go look at what people are saying, see what questions they're asking that creator is not getting around to answering, that maybe has good likes on it, maybe has good engagement, or maybe it's just a recurring question that you see over and over and over again, and you're like, I should answer this question. And you know what you can do? Bookmark that post, make that video, go back and comment to that person and say, hey, I made this video for you because I saw your question. Not only are you going to get a follow out of that because they're like, well, this guy's legit and he answers questions, or she's amazing. She was so clear in how she answered this question. Like I didn't expect that. But also like they're going to be loyal to you. They're going to want to watch more of your content. They're going to want to engage because they know that they feel seen if they comment something, because you already went out of your way to answer it the first time. Who's to say you're not going to do that the second time? Just be consistent and you can build a community super, super fast by doing that. So that's another way to strategize. The last way that I would say to strategize in general is to go and look at viral hooks. And so viral hooks is where you're looking at what's already online, what has performed well in your niche, and just documenting what are the first like 3 to 5 words, or even the first 3 to 5 sentences of sentence, maybe it's just one or maybe it's 2, of what they're saying, and just catalog that. I do this with a lot of videos. I just go and save ones that I'm like, that was a viral hit. Maybe I can use that idea for my stuff. I'm going to use this later. Or sometimes there are tons of assets that people put out there where they say like, hey, if you want my viral hooks, just comment this word and I'll send you a free list. I'm pretty sure that if I go put a list together and I add it into this description, I'm sure that some of you guys could use that too. Just go and find hooks that have already worked, whether it's in your industry or an adjacent industry. And what you do is you templatize it. Be like, okay, I like that hook. That was a good hook. That one applied for them in this industry. Now I can templatize this to where all I have to do is just plug in a different, topic, or a different adjective, or a different, question, or whatever the word is. or maybe it's a person, or maybe it's an industry, or whatever it is. And then you make that your own spin on that piece of content. You want to take all of that and you want to back this by having the understanding of what the viral framework is, so that when you're making your content ideas, this is typically what we do for our clients, so they don't have to worry about this. But if you're doing it by yourself, you just have to understand what is going to be a good idea and how can you create it in the best structure possible so that it performs the best on socials. And that's by knowing that viral framework. You have your hook, you have your substance/value, and you have your payoff/takeaway. You just want to make sure that it follows all three of those in the best way possible, so that when you come up with these ideas, or maybe they're even original ideas of what you're listening to throughout the week, then you can just go document that and then reframe it in a way where you're like, this is going to perform better if I say it like this and elaborate on this, but I still am on that same topic from that idea. That's a very, very powerful skill to have in your arsenal. So you can create any idea, it's going to perform pretty well. Now, the last thing that I will say on this before we move on is, as you're going throughout the week, if you're experiencing things, if you're in meetings, if you're having conversations, if you're on social media, if you're at church, it doesn't matter. Wherever you're at, listen to whatever you're listening to and, paying attention. But if you hear something where you're like, that was good, that was really good, take that note, write that quote down, write what they just said down. If they asked a really great question, doc the question. Be like, oh, that's a great question. I should answer this as a social piece of content. You need to just almost live in this content brain where it doesn't consume your entire life, but you almost have this trigger in the back where when you hear something that's very valuable, one of the filters that your mind processes as the next step is not only oh, that's great, maybe I should apply that in my life, is, ooh, that's great, should I talk about this for social content? And then just write those ideas down. If you just do that as you go, you can document so many different ideas to where you're like, this is awesome. Do it when you're reading books. Do it if you're watching a TV show, YouTube video. It does not matter. Whenever you're consuming, be conscious while you're doing it and use that as an opportunity to leverage ideas that you can then restructure and frame. So when you go into sessions, you just have a list of 30 different topics and you just go, all right, topic 1, this, great. Say the hook, bam, go straight into it. All right, number 2, make conversation. So this is the part of the process where you want to have someone else in the room with you because you want it to feel like it's a conversation. Now, sometimes what you can have this person do is you make the topic, you talk about that, you give the hook and you nail it. And you can either just go down your list and just keep cranking on them. But if that person is really good at asking questions and understands your audience and being able to ask from their perspective, which is a whole nother topic that we can talk about for strategy on how to do this, that I do with my clients, is they can prolong the conversation by asking additional follow-up questions because they can either predict what people are going to comment anyways or what they're going to respond with, or even the sentiment around it, and kind of play that devil's advocate. Ask those extra questions, challenge, push them, get to the deeper levels of whatever you're talking about. And that can also be another piece of content. What you just need to be careful of is that you have a good hook based off of that continuation of that conversation, so you don't bail on the idea or it just doesn't flow and you end up with another piece of content that's just not that great in general. But what you want to do is just make conversation, go back and forth, use the ideas you already have, or ask questions that keep it going, but you want it to feel like you're having a conversation with that other person so it feels more genuine. All right, the next part of this, and this is super important, so listen up. This is going to be on the responsibility of the person who's doing this with you more than on you because you're doing the content live. And so it's hard to get feedback. But A stands for analyze the response. So what I'm doing with my clients is that as they're giving me their 60-second bit on whatever the topic is or the question I ask them, I'm literally imagining that I'm watching this in a short form piece of content, that I'm almost like putting a phone up to them and I'm saying, all right, is this a good piece? Would I watch this? Would I actually want to keep watching this content? And you have to be super honest in this, and you have to have a pretty good taste and understanding of social media and content in order for you to make a educated decision on that, of whether or not that's a great piece of content or not. If you don't have a good understanding of social media, it's going to be really hard for you to make content and give notes and review and analyze and be able to determine if it's good content or not. This could be the make or break for your content if you don't have somebody who's strategized at this and knows this well to be able to help you. Because you're going to have people that are your cheerleaders and be like, that was a great piece of content, I like that. But then you have to ask yourself, but if you saw that in your feed, would you actually watch that? And don't be biased. Do not say, yeah, of course I'd watch that because I love your content. No. Remember, most content, I want to say 90% of all the content you're creating is being distributed to non-followers, people who have no idea who you are. Maybe they have some idea, but it's usually super random. They have no context and they have no emotional ties or even kind of like a schema of who you are, any understanding of you and your brand and your messaging or any of that kind of stuff. So you have to ask that question of like, but if you were a stranger and you saw this piece of content, would you actually care to watch that? And if the answer no, probably wasn't a great piece. But also they need to be able to filter that through the lens of the people who this is for, that audience. Because if you're asking your spouse, like, would you watch this? And it's like, well, I mean, if I'm being honest, no, I wouldn't. But that's also because that's not their industry. That's not what they're interested in. And so find someone who is in your industry, who does want to learn and be educated on this type of content, and maybe bring them in and be like, hey, I'll teach a lot of stuff. I'll coach you up on these things. If you just help me with this content, you get to ask the questions, but you're my ideal audience that I'm trying to reach. Then you get to decide if this is valuable content because you're the type of person that would want to go and watch this anyways. And that's a great barometer for being able to determine if this is great content or not. But just analyze it. You want to go through and make sure, did it have really good substance? Was there actual value in this? Did you feel like there was ever a drop-off rate where you feel like you were doing really good, but it kind of slowed down towards the end and I kind of lost you too. I didn't really feel like, it was going anywhere. Or it's like, I thought it was okay, but you kind of lacked conviction. You kind of feel like you got sidetracked and you didn't feel like you were as bold as you started with. So it didn't feel like it was good. Be honest about that, because then what you want to do is then from that go and refine it, which is the R in the next stage. So we have SMAR, and R is refine the response. So if you have to do it over again, do it over again. If you have to do over the last part where it's just like, all right, I feel like we have a pretty good piece, but I feel like we need a takeaway. What's the purpose of this piece of content? Why does this exist? What do we want people to walk away getting from this piece of content if they're going to watch this all the way through? And so if you can have, an addition on the end, or you can refine just the middle part, but you tweak it enough to where you're like, I think this is a really good piece. If the editors know to kind of go in there and hunt and kind of find, where the end of the clip kind of happened, but then the revisions takes place, be able to match and mold that all back together and kind of stitch it together, you might have a really great piece of content. And the last thing that we want to do in this, and sometimes this happens at the very beginning if you've already prepped your ideas in advance, but some of the times this happens at the very end if it's an on-the-fly session. And what that is topping off with a viral hook. This is so important for you to understand, because if you can't nail this, it doesn't matter the rest of the stuff. This goes back to the exact same principle we already talked about why podcast clips don't work. If you cannot get this to fit the framework and you can't get this to actually convince people in the first 3 to 5 seconds to keep watching, it doesn't matter. It's just as bad as podcast content clips that just don't have that same structure and that framework. And so you have to be able to understand what is a great hook and how to craft it from every single video. The reason I put this at the end is because the definition of a hook is to set an expectation of the viewer's mind of what they're going to get for the next 55 seconds. And in that framework, I bumped this. In that framework, you have at the very end, you have payoff and takeaway. And if you give that payoff or that takeaway too fast, like you give the best first and you have nothing else that's great after, or there's some kind of curiosity and tension and you're not sure what's going to happen, and you spoil it too quickly, then people aren't going to want to watch. I'll give you an example of this tangibly so that it makes sense. My buddy posted a video recently. He's very very passionate about helping men with addictions to pornography and helping them overcome it. And so in a video recently, he was talking about a biblical story that was from the Old Testament. And he was saying, men, you need to stop fighting lust. And it was a good hook because I was like, oh, I'm kind of interested in what this is about. And then he goes on to start a story about the Old Testament story or whatever. But then I read his caption and it says, you need to flee from sexual immorality. And I was like, you gave it away. Like I already have an understanding of this topic. I already have a schema around this. I've already heard these messages preached before, all that kind of stuff. And so I literally texted him. I was like, dude, I think this is a great piece of content, but you gave that payoff way too fast. You had a good hook. You had me curious, but then I read the caption and it just gave away the takeaway. You made it too fast. And if I already have an understanding of that topic and I've heard that preached before, unless I'm in the place where I need that reminder, I might just move on from that piece. But if you didn't say that, I might watch for another 20 seconds. And that makes a huge difference in its performance if you can get people to just watch every extra second that they possibly can. So what you want to do is that you want to make sure that not only do you not give that payoff too early in the video, but you want it to be almost as close to the end as possible so that whatever the hook is, you're not going to get that payoff till the very end of it. And so if you can listen to their response, listen to what they're saying. And now I'm kind of talking through the mind of the person who's interviewing the creator, right? But if you're the creator in this situation, then just take this as both cases, okay? But you just have to be able to recognize what was said in those last few sentences. What was the wrap up? What was the takeaway? What was the last point that was made? Then how can we take that and turn that into the hook at the very beginning of the video, so that the only way they're going to get that payoff is if they listen all the way to the end. And that is a really powerful way to be able to determine what your hook should be. Because if you try to create a hook before, which you can do and we've seen work, whatever the response is, if it delineates from whatever that original hook was, then it's clickbait, right? And people aren't going to like that. They're not going to engage with it. They're going to be frustrated. They're going to be like, I was, like sold into watching this video, but then it had nothing to do with what that hook was about. And so I didn't feel like I got anything out of this. So either they're never going to watch content from you again. They're going to unfollow you because or if they were already following you, but they didn't get that, they're going to unfollow, or they're just not going to ever follow you because they don't trust you, because this guy just does clickbait and I just don't want to watch these videos. So doing the hook at the end is a super powerful way that not a lot of people do, because they try to plan their hooks in the beginning and it doesn't match up with what their content actually says. So in general, you have S, which is strategize, right? Plan your ideas out before, come in with ideas, whether you're the person that's prepping it for the creator or you, the creator yourself, are prepping them. Do all the different strategies as said, which was around, coming up with ideas throughout the week of whatever you found valuable for yourself that you could find valuable for other people, taking down those notes. It could be going and looking at what's trending in your industry, knowing your audience and what are their pain points and what you could solve. So many different things. Strategize, come in with the best ideas possible for your session. Now, what I would add to that is if you can come up with some hooks beforehand, because you know what you're going to say about that topic, because you're the one that's creating the content. Now you have the leverage of being able to create that hook in the beginning because you know what you're going to say and what you want to say towards the end. So what I typically do with my clients is we figure out what is the takeaway first. So we have the idea, we kind of give the general synopsis, but what's your takeaway? What do you want to leave people with? What do you want to say last? And then when you say that, then bam, how do we form that into a hook at the very beginning that gets people super interested in this? Okay, so now you strategize. Now you sit down, you got your studio space, you got everything set up, cameras, your audio, you hit record. And then from there, you want to make real conversation. You want to make it feel like an authentic experience. You want it to feel like you're in a podcast. You want it to feel like someone's in the room with you. And you do that by bringing someone else with you, interview questions, adding on like impromptu questions to kind of keep the conversation going, but just making sure that it's still refined into a 60 to 90 second piece of content. Set a timer, make sure that you kind of look back on it. You can do like watching your highlights or watching the tape from the game, so to say, and just go look at how long your pieces are and then learn you have to refine it and just get better at it. But then after you've made conversation, you're doing your content, the interviewer's job is to analyze your response and refine that response as best as possible to make sure that it fits the framework of the viral framework and that it's something that people actually want to watch and is actually valuable information. If you're the person that's interviewing them, or if you're the one that's trying to find someone to do that, find someone who's going to be super honest with you. Like that is the most beneficial thing that you could do in this situation is find someone who's going to be honest and kind of cutthroat. They'll be like, sounds basic. Sounds like I hear this all the time. Yeah, I've already heard that before. That's not new to me. Those are the things that you want to hear because that's basically saving you the embarrassment of posting out videos that get like maybe a few hundred views and no one wants to engage because that's the truth. They're like, I've already heard this before. It's not that intriguing. So make sure you find someone who's super honest. And then last is top up with the viral hook. Now you can do this yourself or you can have your interviewer help you with this, but either way, listen to whatever your response is and then figure out what your hook should be based off of that. And then make sure you say that in the beginning so that it can get stitched into the video when it goes into editing. Because you can say the hook at the very end after the piece of content was created. And then all your editor has to do is just take that hook and put it into the beginning of the video. And now you have one full sequence. Just make sure that when you do that hook at the very end, it still feels like the natural cadence of the conversation. Don't say it in some scripted voice and then go into the video because it might feel weird. It might feel disingenuous. And there's a lot of people that hate modcasting right now because of that exact reason and it not feeling genuine. So you want to make sure that it still flows with the cadence of whatever you said before so that it flows for the content and the performance is going to be a lot higher on social content. Honestly, you're going to be the best gauge of that because you're the one who just gave the response and you know how you just communicated that. Just follow that same flow. So that's your strategy for smart sessions. That's your acronym. You got strategize, make conversation, analyze responses, refine responses, and top off with a viral hook. That is how our smart sessions happen. That is what I do with my clients. And we are able to crank out a piece of content about every 5 minutes after refining and kind of just brainstorming and having some conversation, sometimes even faster. Sometimes we do it in 2 hours, which is about every 3 minutes we're doing a piece of content, maybe like 3 to 4 minutes. But in general, we can crank out a month's worth of content in those 3 hours and then have tons of content to be posting on social media. My recommendation for you is if you're going to do these and you're very new to content and this is your first time doing this stuff, be doing multiple sessions a month. Don't just do one session. You want the reps, you want the experience, you want to find your flow, figure out what is your shtick, figure out what is the messaging that resonates with people best that you can stick to, and find your voice. You're only going to do that the more reps you have. And if you're only committing to 3 hours a month, it's just going to take you longer to get to that place. Might take you a year, might take you 2 years, versus doing twice a month, doing weekly, doing, bi-daily, whatever it is. Like the more you do it, the more reps and familiarity you have, more confidence, and the better your content's going to perform because you're just going to know how to just riff off content and do it in short form language. There's some pretty great creators out there that do this now, like an Alex Hormozi or a Dan Martell, who can just talk in short form content because they know they got 60 seconds. So it's like, I got to be quick. I got to have a great hook. I got to get straight to the point, no fluff, make it happen. And they just know to do that. And if you can learn how to do that too, you will be above literally 99.9% of creators who do not have those reps, who do not have that experience and do not have the intentionality to learn and actually understand how the viral framework works and how content performs in order for them to get the results that they want to get. And that's just the reality of it. So I hope that's helpful for you. If you actually want, at the very end of this, I have an entire guide that I created in Notion that breaks down the smart sessions more in detail with the links to the products, to the camera gear, to the audio equipment, to everything that you need for your studio setup, even how to set up the studio, and then breaking down more tangibly each of the stages so you can be reminded and actually see what it takes for you to learn how to do this. And so if you want that, the link is down below. You just got to sign up for some email newsletter stuff for me that I'm not going to spam you with. I'm just going to post some stuff about, more value-based content, but I'll send that to you and then you'll have that for your resources and you can use that to get started and actually have everything that you need. But hopefully this was an in-depth breakdown that really helps you better understand how these sessions work. If it was helpful for you, make sure to leave a review, to like it, to subscribe to this channel, whatever platform you're listening on. Would love to engage with you on social media. So if you head over to Kings Media Co. on social platforms, specifically Instagram is where I love to be the most. Go ahead and hit me up there, ask questions, let me know what you want me to talk more about, and then I can plan that into my content and serve you better. All right, my friends, keep crushing it with content. Peace out.